Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It's Chris and Sarah again. This is our fourth in this series. We're going to be entering into some exploration of power play, following on the threads of polarity that we've been exploring. And we've been doing an attunement each video. This time we're going to change it just slightly, which is that I'm going to actually guide Sarah through a process, and I invite you to watch and witness the dynamic. And it's another time through, if you'd like to follow along, feel free to do so. But for first time through, I'd recommend just actually like observing this process. So I'm gonna do some guidance for Sarah as a way for us to start to reflect and embody this dynamic that we're going to be speaking about in this episode. So, Sarah, I'm going to first invite you to look around, gently scan in your environment, in your home, for it's safe. Just checking out, you're in a safe place, you're in your own home. Notice beauty around you, notice spaciousness in your environment, just so you feel nice and cozy and settled and warm in your own space. And then, if you're okay with this, if you're willing, I'll invite you in a few moments if you want to close your eyes. And I'll promise to be watching through the video your environment. Nothing's going to happen, but were something to happen, I would call you to attention. And so I'll be scanning and watching for you on your behalf. So that should you want to, you might have a chance to go a little bit inwardly and feel that there's still safety enveloping you. Does that sound good? So if it does, just gently closing your eyes and gently coming in contact with your breath, not needing to change it, not just starting to feel the way that your body breathes, how it breathes of its own nature. And as you're sinking into your breath, allow your attention to sink into your heart, to notice and to feel what's there for you with some curiosity, some nice equanimity, a nice gentle listening, not needing to do anything about it, just attending, welcoming, sinking into your heart. Not if it feels right, you don't need to, but if the current is there, you might find that your attention wants to sink down to your belly, to listening to the wisdom and the communication that's in this part of you. And now I'm going to invite you to start gently coming back to your heart and very, very slowly, no rush. Maybe hear some sounds in your environment, your eyes still closed, but just very gently starting to give a little bit of recollection, maybe some gentle squeezes of your arms outside of your legs to remind yourself of your physical containment. And let your eyes, don't open them, but let them open as they want to. Hmm. And as they do, again, very slowly and gently, just start to notice your environment, coming back to your sense of self, noticing the safety and the spaciousness in your environment. Yeah, there you are. Hey. So that was an experience of, we could call that leading and being led, or leading and following, uh, an inducer and inducee. Or we could call it a little edgy, in a little more edgy way, dominance and submission. And that is an example of a way in which we're all participating in this play of leading and following. But we can do it consciously in a way that's life-giving and restorative, or it can go on unconsciously in ways that are, not so healthy. So, Sarah, are you feeling back and coalesced?
Yeah, I wonder if we could do this whole episode where I just like speak in like sounds. Mm-hmm.
Do an ASMR with Sarah. Sarah's doing that.
Totally.
Hmm.
Coalesce
Good.
is a really beautiful. We'll talk more about this, but I just really love that term coalesce because it can
Mm.
feel like I'll just maybe describe my somatic experience. It's like
Mm.
the busy kind of thought life, the who am I in my personhood? How am I experienced in my personhood? Am I saying smart things? Am I being, tracked appropriately? Did what I just say sound stupid? Really just kind of like measuring and thin in many ways, outwardly facing in a way that I am one of the many voices of self in that experience. And then it's like going down into the voice of self and being with that experience of the I-ness in the whole journey of, Sarah's story in life. And then really giving that one like more of a forward facing, true, um, role in my consciousness. So, um, yeah, it's a really, really beautiful way to get grounded and to get kind of like clear on energetically that signature that is inherently me. And that feels like a relief.
Mm. Good.
Yeah.
I'm glad. Thank you for trusting me and letting me do that. It's very sweet on my end too.
Mm.
You know.
Mhm.
So we're going to be talking BDSM and power play and some of
Yeah,
the
we are.
spicier elements. So just as a bit of a review of, you might think, well, this is a crazy left turn. How did we get here? But there is a logic. There is a trajectory. So in our first video, we looked at polarity, yin and yang. Yang as the outward gazing, directive, and in this case, space holding dynamic of life, and yin being the inward, receptive flow, the tide going in, the tide going out, day and night, the seasons. We can see them all over the place on daily, on yearly basis, small levels, medium levels, large size levels. Life is this dance or this interplay of directive and receptive, yang and yin, yin and yang. And then in episode two, we looked at, okay, well, if that's the flow of life, how can we align to that current in terms of intimacy with ourselves and with another? And for that episode, we have to bring a little more subtlety in because if we got two people, then we actually have four energies because each has their own direction and reception. So there's two for each. So two by two creates four. And we went through in quite a bit of detail. And I recommend, if you need to listen or re-listen to that one, what happens when we orient the process to the heart of the receptive? What happens when the whole orientation changes to be leaning towards or principally oriented to the receptive partner? And how does that change the intention? How does that change the flow, the timing, the sense of space? We went in great detail on that. And that led us in the last video to look at the entire arc, the long sort of journey of a yin or a receptive going through the entire arc of arousal, safety, deepening into bodily ecstasy, and being safely led through a process of coming back into a state of integration and a deeper form of their own wholeness and their shininess, like we just saw with Sarah. And that now leads us to where we're going to go in this one, which is now that we've had this deep dive into the polarities within an individual, polarities between individuals, what if they also want to play with specifically the polarity of power? And so, as I like to say, the polarity work, Tantra work that we've been discussing in the prior episodes is basically 75% as the fundamental foundation. And then this one is adding a little extra. But in my experience and the way we're going to be exploring this class, first of all, no one has to go down this road. This is if they want to do so. Some people will find that they're deeply happy and whole and profoundly fulfilled in a tantric polarity piece that isn't really focused on playing with power, and that's wonderful and great. If so, and others will find they may have an interest in exploring. This takes it up a little bit of a notch, so therefore, all the same principles of safety and space holding and slowed down also go up a notch. Um, because power is one of the forces of life. We can either learn to artfully master it, or we get to be usually unconsciously mastered by it. So that's where we've been and how we've gotten to here. Sarah, did you want to say a few things?
I'll try. Ah, yeah, I mean, I guess maybe what I would share that can be like sort of helpful is in my journey to discovering BDSM for kind of prior to understanding it to the degree that I'm learning about it now. My previous projection was like, oh, well, that's just like something that's like super kinky and really, really out there. And for people that are just like radically traumatized in some way. And that's the only way that they're able to, access sexual or sensual enjoyment. And I feel so bad for them, like, like sort of this like sense of like, oh, you must be broken in some way. Um, and then I started discovering it just like through psychologists that I really respected and admired, and the work that they were doing in the somatic realm, and sort of what I had been observing in my career as a massage therapist, as well as like I grew up training animals. And so I have observed this like leader follower physical expression of this is much easier for us to do if one of us knows what we're doing and is leading what's happening here. And then that can be incredibly beneficial for those that are being led or, willing to be led in that way. And my long-term career of like caring how to do that better, how do I help people experience safety in their life as a massage therapist or as a coach or a counselor or as a friend or as a mother of an autistic son? How do I attune to and track a nervous system in such a way that that nervous system is able to thrive and kind of come to a space where it's regulated? A lot of these terms that we're going to be speaking about, regulation and somatic co-regulation and vulnerability and leader follower things, like these are elements that were part of my teaching with my son and helping my son regulate his nervous system in a time where that was like the most important thing that he needed in that moment. So these like organic impulses of mothering or nurturing or being somebody that cares for another, when broken down into what's happening, there's this incredible purity to it that I was really sort of shocked. And I often find that life does this, where you're like that thing that's like really bad and wrong or seemingly dirty or like, don't go there, it's taboo. And I'm like, I have a curiosity. I'll just be honest. I'm like, there's a little bit of a heretic inside of me that's like, really? Why? What's so wrong with it? And so that curiosity led me to do some research and BDSM is an acronym for a couple of things. Like there's a couple of terms that are all hidden into this acronym. Bondage, discipline, sadism, masochism, but then also the D and the S in the middle of it is this dominance and submission part. So started exploring, the elements of like, well, that's so interesting. In my experience with rope and learning about rope as a way of working with containment, started to discover that there's this experience, and we'll go into this in more detail, but there's this experience of what I call like deep containment, which is the nervous system feeling a level of safety that I hadn't had access to for a very long time. And in kind of, any of my drug journeys or experiences where I was like chasing enlightenment in some way or another, didn't have access to this level of like softened peace and deep surrender that felt really deeply embodied and not just kind of this heady quietness or this sort of dissociative experience of love and light. It was like a deep peace experience. And so anybody that's been in subspace will like immediately be like, oh, I want to experience that again. Like, what was that? What was that feeling of like completely trusting in another person to lead you, or even the universe to be your leader more than you maybe ever have? So that space of power and trustment became something that I got really curious about. And then as we were discussing it, it was like this really beautiful parallel to like the space of cracking the codes, which what you were speaking about is like in that program we put together this space of looking at like the nervous system needs safety. And for us to learn, we need to have safety. And if we experience safety as a physical expression of safety, like somebody else takes us to safety, then that space of surrender within the safety leads to transformation. It leads to this like restoration of the love that's already here, or this sort of nature which is already, very generous within me. All I needed was to come to that space of being regulated and in my safety. And then things that are kind of old unconscious patterns of behavior and relationships or old addictive patterns are easier to transform and stop choosing consciously, because the element that had been inhibiting them from being looked at in a different way was the nervous system in its dysregulation, in its inability to come to a space of like, I don't need to have all the answers all the time. Don't need to be the one in charge all the time. And in fact, there's more intelligence there when you're willing to get out of your own way than you might be able to experience. So I'm gonna just maybe I'll just give some like terms of definitions of like some of the like things that we're going to be throwing around so that people can understand some of the terms. I like to say containment is somatic containment, but maybe I'll speak about it, Chris, and then you can talk about what you see containment as. Um, I experience containment from the nervous system perspective of like this like energetic, emotional, and physical um, space of being less in the mind and more dropped down into the body and integrated into my body experience. But containment can also just be like an understanding where it's like, well, here's the container of time that we're having a meeting. And so I know that I can bring my full attention to something because I have a proximity of awareness that I'm like orienting to. So it's a really great term both for the physical expression of containing myself as well as the orientation, like we're going to talk about more as the directive of the yin to be contained within themselves. The other element is power entrustment, which is this concept of uh, employing or inviting somebody to take over elements of your faculties so that you don't need to track for them. You don't need to pay attention to them to the degree that you normally are. And that experience of releasing aspects of your autonomy and offering them to somebody else has this really beautiful, like relieving, when you're willing to like stop being so darn good at being upset and micromanaging and hyper vigilant, when you're willing to kind of like step away from that and go like, well, what if I did just clear my plate a little bit and gave up some of these responsibilities and truly turn towards, like Chris led me and like, all right, you're going to track for my safety in my environment, and I can trust and only keep my gaze inward. And nothing's going to jump out at me, or like, nothing's going to happen to me that's beyond my capacity for safety. And that feeling isn't much different than like, I don't know if you've ever ballroom danced before or other experiences of like trust exercises like this where somebody like leads you around blindfolded are really great ways of practicing that experience of like surrendering your trust to somebody else, because there's a deeper layer of vulnerability and intimacy that we get that just emerges from doing that. Like if I'm willing to give up a part of my self-protection to somebody else, what emerges is like a more authentic impulse of my truth, my vulnerability. And so it's this really beautiful way to get to know who we are in this present moment in a really authentic way, in a really revealing nature. Because in my experience, working with people for many years and in my human experience, it's not uncommon for us to be unconsciously running patterns of who we think we are and not really asking ourselves that question of like, wait, who am I today that is different from yesterday and 2 months ago and 6 months ago? And if you've got a partner, if you've been in a relationship with somebody, then you have two people, like you said, like now we have two people that are like, oh, I know Chris is this way, and Chris knows that Sarah is this way. And so we go into this default mode network of our nervous system, which doesn't need to work anymore. It doesn't need to ask ourselves those questions. And that's fine for a time. And there's an intelligence in that for a time. But it does lead to kind of this experience of like, what's my purpose and what the F are we actually doing in life? Like, I don't feel anything. I don't really feel anything. And that numbness experience is sort of this kind of prolific malaise through society that I've seen where many people are looking to feel alive again. They're looking to feel like truly the sense of the emergence of their inner being. I'd love to know if you have other parts to add to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the piece you just spoke to there, the longing, is really, really important. And therefore BDSM or other things, but since we're focused on power play in this talk, then it becomes the shiny object, or can become the shiny new, ooh, it's taboo, ooh, it's, somebody told me I should do this thing. I'm like, oh God, that's not the reason to go down this road. So to be able to take that longing, but to mature it, and in this case through alchemical practice. So so the as we've been speaking in the prior episodes, the yang character is now going to become the dom, and the person occupying the yin or receptive pole is now going to be called, specifically in this topic when we're playing with power, a sub or a submissive. And that both links it to everything we've talked about before, as I said, like the 75%, the attunement, the space holding, the titration, safety, willingness to go really slowly, surrendering, the you process, starting in the outer courtyard, going to the inner courtyard, consent at every point, wholeness at each and every point, not having an agenda to get somewhere, but just to have deeper intimacy and pleasure and connection, and to just listen to where the yeses are. All of that is, for me, really the true and deep foundation to then add the additional element of then, okay, if we're going to talk about binding, literally and or figuratively, and there's going to be entrusting from the submissive to the dom of some form of their self-control or their self-responsibility or self-tracking, as you were saying, then that really, first, it differentiates, as we've been doing. Like there's a yoga for the sub that is theirs, and there's a yoga for the dom. And then we can really start to get clear, particularly as we're going to go through here. We're going to look at it first through the lens of the sub or the yin. And what is their path? What is their path of transformation? And then basically kind of reverse engineer what is correct or beautiful or artful doming that would be the right kind of doming given the intention of that kind of transformational, empowered, and sovereign form of submission. So the ethical bar is high, the orientation to consciousness and care and conscientiousness is high in this way, which I think is a really important response to what you were saying earlier around uh, conventional societal, kind of sense of like, oh, that's for those people who are all traumatized or weirdos or freaks or whatever, and they're just into weird stuff. And no, no, like this is requires a different level of conscientiousness that is not typically expressed in most people's conventional sexual erotic lives. If it's going to be done well, of course, there is the stereotype exists of what I call trauma hot potato, which is just like, no, you take it. No, I don't want it. You take it. And then everybody's just trying to, of course, that's there, but that's there in, you don't have to get into BDSM to have trauma hot potato in the realm of sexuality. It's easy to be like, those people over there are so weird and put all the, negativity over on them and scapegoat them. it's not like the usual thing is working particularly well society-wide. So,
The thing that I kind of marvel at with BDSM is the amount of truth, and we'll go into this like, even more in detail, but I just want to keep speaking to it, the amount of like kind of access to my inner child, to my deep yearnings, to the places that um when I give myself full permission to host awareness around, they've been there. Like this unconscious, subconscious body intelligence has been pulling these strings and making me act in this way that I was like, I don't know why this is happening. It's just kind of like these responses, and I don't know why I'm so angry about this thing that you did. And, I wasn't really truly able to kind of get clear on what was arriving for me because I was distracted with all of the nature of like, well, what does that mean for the person that I'm talking to? Or what does that mean for, the way that I regard myself when I'm trying to understand why my body is having this reaction that it's having. And if you are able to, in any therapeutic dynamic, however you want to kind of look at it, or any kind of like personal referencing of self, if you're able to really focus, deeply focus on anything for a period of time, watch what's there and how much it changes just from being able to bring our like conscious awareness to something. And I feel like as a practitioner for so many years, I was trained to sort of like look for the downstream symptomology of like what's going on and go through an assessment model and really kind of look like a pathological approach of the human experience of like, oh, there's sadness. How do we fix the sadness? Or, oh, there's pain. How do we fix the pain? Or, oh, there's depression or stuck energy. How do we understand what caused all of those things? And what I've found is this modality of just the way that I turn my awareness has given me so much clarity of what's really there from this place of like wholeness, as opposed to it being anything's bad or wrong within my experience. There's like a real beautiful innocence that's inside that's seeking to come out and say like, hey, I'd like to share some of these pieces that you've been ignoring, and I have some needs that I'd like you to understand, and they matter. And maybe that conflicts with your belief about if that's something that's worthy of your permission to matter or not. But I'm here, and when I turn my attention fully inward, you can't not see it. But it's also like just that just the ability to turn towards it has this natural cathartic release as a response of it. So it's not like anything needs to be fixed. It just sort of, it needs to be seen. Once it's seen and approved of, once there's safety and there's love, what emerges is flow. Again, what emerges is this restoration that you were speaking to. So yeah, that's a real sweet experience. And who knew, as a massage therapist, I'm just going to define sadism and masochism because it made me laugh so much of like when I started looking these up, I was like, oh, right, of course. Like sadism is this experience, just the definition of it is the experience of pleasure, arousal, or satisfaction from inflicting pain, control, or intense sensations with the full informed consensual participation of the receiving partner. Masochism is the experience of deriving pleasure, physical, emotional, or psychological from pain, discomfort, or submission, and how much that's like, oh yeah, like the way I work out. You mean like that thing, or the way I was like for years a massage therapist and like working on, acute injuries, or all of these things. It's like, wow, there's a real familiarity to me in this realm already. I understood it in quite a bit of detail. But nothing really prepared me for the revelation of subspace and sort of that euphoric. So if anybody has not experienced subspace, it's like this dreamlike, floaty, deeply trusting, surrendered experience of like really belonging to life. And I just didn't know you could experience that much safety. I just didn't know that there could be that much of an experience of like being deeply held by life. So it was quite a shock.
and it's, I think, yeah, I love that you're saying that, and I think it's Tantra is always, or alchemy, as we've talked about in the prior ones, is the thing that seems like it's the bad, as you were saying earlier, like the bad or the wrong thing. the snake venom might become the antidote. So who would have guessed that inherent, hidden inside of dominance is the possibility for this kind of liberation? So when we don't have this third alchemical option, we either see the unconscious forms, and we see them all over our world, of destructive, unconscious, and harmful dominance. You see that politically everywhere. You see it all over the place. And it's pervasive and it's awful and it's wrong and it's yucky and all the things. And that naturally creates a reaction against the negativity, understandably, to say, this form of dominance is bad, and this is wrong, and this is wrong. And it's not consensual, it's dominating, in an unhelpful way. It's not chosen, it's not safe. It's all the opposites of everything we're talking about. But that can eventually go its own way into just dominance is inherently bad or wrong because understandably we see sympathetically we see like so much negative version of it everywhere. It's understandable to go to a place of like, well, dominance must just be inherently a bad thing, and then one becomes anti-dominance, for example. And what's missed is this hidden gem in the tantra, in the alchemy, where the venom might become the antidote if it has all these safeties, if it has all these protocols, it can actually transmute. And hidden inside of the potential shadow of dominance is actually the space for profound surrender and bliss. And that's not going to be available if our only two options are either you should be unconsciously dominating in a disgusting, harmful way, or you should, of course, be more compassionate and not oriented to harming people. So those are your two options. But this creates the possibility of like, as you were saying, this like enticing, like, oh, is there another possibility here that's a little taboo and might be a little interesting? Yeah. So that's where we're going with this.
Um, Safety. I'm just going to touch on safety as like an important part of one of the kind of first of all, as much as Chris and I are like excited to share this information, we're not advocating for anybody to go down this road. It might seem like we're evangelizing because yeah, we're pretty well, I'll just speak for myself, pretty excited about some of my like somatic experiences of what I've learned. And so much of this experience has come when like groups of friends that understand rope and we've all got clothes on and we all have like trauma informed backgrounds and there's like ways of taking this into the bedroom, into your partnership, into a variety of different expressions. But it's easy to lump it all into like this like ball gag kind of basement sort of scene. I would just like to say it doesn't need to be. It can if that's your thing. But that hasn't been my experience at this point in my journey yet. I don't
Well,
know.
and I think it's also important to say that A, it's becoming more popular, and
Mhm.
B, you had people, that you've been working with say like, hey, I'm interested in this topic. So it's not that it's, you know, yeah, in terms of since it's already getting into people's radar screens, it's worth talking about if one is going to go down this road, how to do it well, because there's a lot of ways to not do it well.
There's a lot of ways to not do it well. But it's also like when it comes to alchemy and sort of like what we were doing and cracking the codes where I was like, yeah, there's like this kind of pattern that I have and I'd like to like contemplate it. And, as a Gene Keys guide and what so much of my work is like around this, like there's a charge of something that's bugging me and I don't quite understand it. And then there's like this place of like, how do I get to this, really authentic expression of claiming that part of my wholeness journey. And that is a really beautiful, gentle path. It's not as fast or efficient as some of the transformational alchemy that I've experienced in this. So I'm speaking at it from the somatic information that comes up and some of the charges of wounding that can be carried in that somatic information, and then really looking at sort of those ruptures that can happen in your childhood that are influencing the way you relate to another person and the way that you feel safe in yourself, and maybe some of your experiences of like not being able to kind of come to a softening around orgasm or sensual experiences with somebody because there's shame of like what do my thighs look like, or what do my saggy boobs look like, or sort of this like journey that you might not even know is influencing you. And then when you really start to kind of have a lot of safety around agreements and what we're talking about, and a lot of like a capacity to be deeply vulnerable, it's in my experience met with this like real sweet like human like, yeah, that belongs, and that like permission field that you didn't even know that you needed a permission for becomes so healing. And it just, I don't think, I think this is what I've observed is like our human species is like kind of scared of sexuality and the nature of like what's available in erotic transformation because we've been conditioned away from it, where it's like, well, don't go there, that's like dirty, or like that's like only sacred, in a way that it's like only when you're married and only when like whatever your relationship to these kind of cultural um, rumors are, you'll find them in this kind of journey of like, I didn't even know I was divorcing this part of my body, or I didn't even know I was divorcing this part of my need until I was given the opportunity to be like, well, is this here? And it's like, oh yeah, yeah, that's under there. I didn't even know. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, agreements. I'm gonna just like, there's a couple pieces before we get into some of the teaching on this. Informed, enthusiastic, and ongoing consent. Like consent is like such a beautiful place to remind everybody like this is consensual. You don't need to like that there's nothing happening without you being like emphatically like, yeah, sign me up. I want to be involved in that. All parties are, freely able to remove their consent at any time. There's no pressure, there's no manipulation, and no coercion. And if you're interested in the wheel of consent and you want to understand consent more, please just reach out to me and I'll share some of the teaching that I have about like really just remarkable ways of understanding consent, and how often I see that consent isn't really addressed or freely given. And then there's this confusion that shows up between people who are like, well, I think he's offering me a foot massage, but actually I think he wants sex, and it's confusing, and now I'm just agitated because there isn't like this clear agreement. So agreements lead to freedom. Boundaries lead to wildness, in my experience. And if you want an example of this, well, then just like remember the last time you went to a theme party and it was like the theme is Halloween and everybody gets dressed up and they act differently in their personhood than they do at any other party, and somehow they always have so much more fun. So the boundary is like come in a costume and then watch how quickly people start to they allow themselves to be more playful in their life. So that's something that also shows up in this like realm. Communicating expectations, negotiating, here's my boundaries, all of these like layers of boundaries that you know about yourself, or maybe don't even know, can be so helpful to discover, what is my boundary, um, allows for more freedom. When you understand, like, this is the no-go, it's like, wow, that's a lot of go zone. If this is the no-go, that's a lot of go zone that we can play with. So, all of this in devotion to trust, um, and like personal accountability. And we'll talk about like those details and more. I'll also leave some links for optional material and references in the show notes. I'm curious, are you ready for me to pull up that slide for
Let's do it.
the container slide?
Yeah.
How's that?
Oh,
Oh,
yeah, there
yeah.
we go.
How about
It's a
now?
little, yeah, is it still a little like, it's too big? It's pretty close now. I don't know if it can like yeah, there you go. That's it.
Bigger?
Ta-da. Ta-da. Well done. We showed this one in one of the earlier videos. I just really love this one. It's one of the contradictions of life that a flow has to be contained to maintain movement. And the containing, as we said, here specifically in this context, would be binding, whether literal of some variety or figurative. That as you were just saying, the boundary is what allows the wildness. In the language of the that we've been using of Tantra, where the fire needs to be under the water to create the paradoxical union as fire water. The the safety, the trust, the container is what allows for the primalness. People can be, they might want to dress provocatively, but then go out to some random club or bar or something. Like, yeah, you have a lot of fire, but you might not have a lot of the safety side. Like, it's playing with fire. It could work out. It could also be kind of dangerous. Here, we're much more interested in, given everything we've shared about starting in the outer courtyard, starting with polarity, everything is whole unto itself, going slowly, is you're building the capacity to be attuned so that we're not starting, not starting in the deep end. Like learn to actually like enjoy the kiddie pool and then the like next layer up to your shins or whatever. And so we can go so slowly in this so that if we are eventually feeling capable, desiring, um, consensual, these kind of zones, as you were sharing, Sarah, are like the most intimate of the most intimate. To really, if speaking more from on the yang dom side, to have someone melt inside of the space is a very sacred thing. And there's a high degree of ethical responsibility, as we've been talking about, but also the gift of getting, it's really breathtaking to behold a being go into their literal and or figurative nakedness, into their most innocent nature of their being. And that is a whole arena of life that is available if done artfully and well here. The flow that's spoken of there is the flow, I would say, first, primarily of the sub or the yin to go into their own experience. This is, again, one of the key parts that's really countercultural and so powerful in this approach is that the yin is not trying to perform, the sub is not trying to please the dom, which is maybe counterintuitive to some people, but actually they go inward. And as they go inward into their flow, into that movement, what they start to experience is inner ecstasy. While the dom or the yang character is entrusted with some of their forms of otherwise self agency and self protection and self control and responsibility, as we were saying earlier. And that means that the boundary and the container just gets continually stronger. And as it gets stronger, that opens up the possibility for deeper and deeper forms of submission and surrender into their own internal ecstasy, into their own internal bliss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of work getting there. I parallel it to breath work at times where it's kind of like this, like you do have to stay committed to it. You know, you think it's just breathing, but you actually have to like work for it a little bit and get past some of your defense systems that are well entrenched for keeping you not so selfish and not so like self-absorbed or self-consumed or, you know, this space societally where all of us, but I would just speak from the inside of the experience of being in a woman's body in this iteration anyway. Uh, there's a lot of conditioning, which is like, don't make it all about you and don't spend too much time inward gazing and, you know, that whole process of we spoke about it earlier, but just kind of that like oh, I don't want to take up too much space or I don't want to take too long or sort of like that kind of, you know, releasing yourself from that can it can be initially this like unstitching yourself from these ways that you've solved emotional discomfort or solved an experience that was related to an earlier previous, you know, identity in such a way. But now you will maybe want to renegotiate that. And that's a really beautiful thing for two people to offer each other. is the opportunity to be like, no, you go into it. Like you do you. I will make sure nothing crashes on your head.
Yeah. So the container, if you're talking specifically binding,
Yeah.
you know, could be very physical in terms of restraints or if a person, some people just like to be like wrapped up in a blanket and get, you don't even have to think of it first sexually, just someone who's having a hard day and crying and what it really means for another person just to hold them and say, I got you. It's okay. And how different an experience it is for them to be able to go into if they're maybe sad in that moment, having a hard day, like what it is to like, okay, I got myself and I'm gonna feel my feelings and versus somebody just like bear hugs them and says like, I got you, it's okay. And then just feel them like really melt into, in that case, maybe some sorrow and how relieving that can be. Well, in the same sense here, if we're working more with, say, with desire or desire for intense sensation, it's like somebody's held and they're like, I got you. And then they get to go completely into their inner fire, then they'll actually get to experience it at a different level because they're not burdened by having to be their own container and do their own process.
Yeah. Swaddling a baby, same thing, they're used to the womb and then there's like no womb. Like get out and I'm like, I can like uncontained feeling can feel like this startling shock on the other side of an initiation, like birth. You go through some changes in your life and then there can be these moments of like, wait, who am I relative to something else? And in that time of discovering, one of the most helpful things we can do is co-regulate and contain each other. And we do this in so many ways. Even like the way somebody shakes your hand is like a meeting. Like, what kind of containment is this person offering? Are they really there? Or are they giving me like a willowy little, hey, it's like I don't really have myself. I'm not really fully present with you. Or like, do I want to do business with this person? We are communicating with our nervous systems all the time in these ways. And even to hear somebody say, I've got you, like that sentence in itself can induce this melting. So sometimes that can, just be a tough day and somebody gives you a hug and you start to cry. That process of uncontained to contained to melting is something that we're going to keep talking about. Is like there's a lot of this already where the nervous system's reaching for something and then it's met and then it's able to take that energy instead of it reaching out and turn it back inwards. And then there's this restoration flow that starts to happen. Um, which is less kinky and more sweet. Sorry, I jumped ahead a little bit. Are we okay to go this
No,
way?
that's good. Yeah, that's good. So in this slide, we're again looking at yin and yang, or yin in a BDSM context, we can change that to sub, and yang is dom, right? They're interchangeable when we're playing with the power. So this looks at the terms we came up with and the cracking the codes and how they apply now. So what happens when we look at BDSM through the lens of alchemy, and what happens to alchemy when we bring in BDSM they get to be dance partners. So the yin or the sub, their yoga, their path, their practice is the willingness to be seen and felt. And the willingness word is consent, right? They have to be willing. I asked Sarah, is it okay? Would you trust me to watch your environment for you and you go within? She chose to do that. That was her choice. I made an invitation. She's free to say yes or no. So, willingness is key here. As we've been saying throughout, yin or sub is not passive. This is an active form of surrender. It's an active receptivity, which makes it sovereign, makes it empowering when done rightly, when the art is done rightly here. So the willingness to be seen and felt. If they're too, oh, but I don't look, oh, but da, 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 right? As opposed to, no. In order to go into submissive space, one needs to be okay to be beheld. And as Sarah was saying there, is going to have to work with the uncomfortability, perhaps at first, of social conditioning that says that that's selfish or that's prideful or that's wrong in some way. And actually, just to get a really deep green light that it's completely okay to let go and be fundamentally beheld and witnessed. And again, this is where we start slowly and build, and to the degree that people want to do so mutually, if they want to keep going to deeper and deeper layers of intimacy. Next part is surrender through trust and discernment. So if they're willing to be seen and felt, and they're willing now to entrust or surrender or give over to another for a temporary period of time, some parts of them, their normal self tracking, that's a lot of trust. The discernment side comes in with the Dom showing that they have the capacity and the skill and the willingness to do so. This isn't just stuff you would hand over to anybody willy-nilly. These are the keys to one's kingdom we're talking about. So the level of trust and the level, therefore, as we'll get to the other side on the yang or the dom, like the capacity that is necessary is really has to be developed or cultivated so that the sub really gets from the dom a clear indication. Yes, I can fly this plane. Yes, I can land this thing. And I can't do it for you, but I'll be the one holding the space and I'll be the one present and making sure this is a safe process. And they have to actually be able to communicate that, not just verbally, but they need to be able to communicate it with their nervous system. They need to be congruent in their alignment. And if not, then it's not yet. So that's a key part for an empowered sub is to become discerning of what is good doming and what is not. The truth is sensation. So if they go down into the U, assuming the Dom has the requisite skill set and they've worked on their agreements and there's a conscious, consensual, mutual process and it's being done well, then at a certain point, now that they've let go of some normal forms of self-tracking, their process is they need to keep going inwardly. And as Sarah was saying, what might be there inwardly are ways that they cut themselves off, both potentially from things like grief, if there's old wounds in there, but also places where they've cut themselves off from ecstasy and profound pleasure and power and radiance and their potency and their wildness and their animal body and their ferocity and their immense capacity for love and their body's immense capacity for bliss. And so the yoga for the sub is the willingness to feel and complete all of that. They might be in sounds of really deep pleasure 1 second and then crying the next one and then laughing the moment after that. It can get very primal and wild. So the containment is, of course, really key, but ultimately it's their process and no one can do that for a sub. That's their process. But they do need in this process, they ask for someone to assist in this very special way. So when we look at it from the sub or the yin perspective, then as I was saying there, we can kind of start to reverse engineer what is the necessary form of dominance that would be conscious and life-giving. And so when we look on the other side of the slide, you see clarity of intention, space holding, and attunement. So the Dom has to have the presence to fill up the room. Remember that yin spirals inwardly, yang spirals outwardly. And in this case, that's what creates the bubble of protection and safety. They have to have a clear intention that they understand what is their role as the Dom and what is the yin's path and the arc of their arousal and all the things we spoke about in the prior episodes. They need to be extremely clear on that, that they are there to witness, to behold, to space hold, to fly the plane, to organize the process, and to, should the sub want to, they're now within the space of safety, should they choose to do so, to surrender inside of that space that the Dom has created. And a big part of that clarity of intention is understanding that while it may appear as if the sub is submitting to the Dom, they are in fact submitting to their own body's ecstasy. They're actually surrendering into their own for to be a conduit for the yin force of life. And that's a huge point of humility, humble, you know, versus arrogance for the Dom to really know that. And therefore to really have a heartful orientation, a loving dominance that is remembering that they're being entrusted with really intimate aspects and zones of another person's being. And that's an incredible gift. And it's super, super precious and loving. And it requires obviously properly safeguarding and caring for those aspects. So the attunement part is the ability to continue. Remember, it's ongoing consent. And that consent will, over time, in this kind of process, lean more and more to nonverbal forms of communication. As the sub goes deeper into the you, if they feel safe and they really start melting and sinking and surrendering and submitting, their usual cognitive verbal stuff and sense of self is gonna start fading into the background, as Sarah was saying, and what's going to come into the foreground is more the animal body and more like the deep longings and desires and the primal intelligence of the body. And therefore, the attunement to read ongoing consent from the Dom side is going to come in the form of things like, if there's touch this way, are they melting and receiving that touch, or are they clenching? Is the breath, if they're kissed or stroked a certain way, does their breath deepen? Are there sounds of yumminess? Or is there more kind of awkward silence or clenching in the body? Like to really, on these very subtle levels, stay really attuned to oneself and attuned to the other so that you can hear where the yeses are and follow the yeses. So by first differentiating, the whole point in polarity work is you, as we talked about from the first episode, is like we actually want to differentiate, we want to tease apart and actually let the poles on the continuum be expanded and then reintegrate. And that's where the potency of it comes from.
And this like experience that feels like a restoration, like it's a lot of this work and a lot of the movement of wanting to bring this to the forefront of what's available for couples or for individuals in this teaching has come from this space where in my work with women, the this like access to fully open themselves is like something that we can go a long ways into this journey in claiming our wildness and healing through creating an inner awareness of what's true for me and what's there. And then inevitably, there's like a certain depth that every woman in my experience gets to, myself included, where they can't go by themselves any deeper than they already have been able to. And we need another person to support us in that. And I think that this is such a beautiful part about humanity is like built into the script is this interdependence where we are capable of being integrated versions of yang and yin in ourselves, and we are that as our like that's our nature, and that there's a bigger version available when we come into complementarity that will give you access to parts of you that you maybe not have had access to in your life. And I really like the word communion didn't make sense to me until I started to understand this more, like the nature of communion has really transformed as a result of that. But I also just love, and I wanted to highlight how you were sharing this, like somebody needs to be flying the plane. Somebody like is gonna take the plane on a journey and you're gonna have a destination. And then, you think of pilots and you think they greet people. They're standing there like, welcome aboard. Go find your seat. We'll give you a drink in a minute. Like you're here, but they do that because you get to see who's flying the plane. You get to see like there's a person here, and that feels really good to our nervous systems to meet that person and, trust that like I'm gonna give my life to this person. And for that person that's flying the plane, the pilot, they're like, I have however many souls that I'm responsible for on this journey. And they actually call it souls on the journey when they talk about like I can't think of the word right now, um, manifesto. Uh, and then they greet you at the end of it. Also, it's like, we landed the plane, but nobody in the moments of like when there's turbulence, you don't run up to knock on the door and be like, hey, are you sure you know what you're doing? Because maybe I should take over. Why don't you just let me sit in the cockpit? You go have a cocktail. I've had enough of them. Maybe I'll take over flying now. And yet this happens in relationships all the time where there's sort of this like, do you know what you're doing? I'm not really sure. And this comes up in these complaints that I hear from feminine or from yin of not trusting masculine leadership in this way or not trusting outer world leadership in another way. And so that space of entrustment and practicing trust is an art form. It's this feminine art form, is this experience of surrendered living that I would say this as a practice really helps you start to kind of stop knocking on the pilot's door and being like, are you sure you got this? Because you start to kind of get like, I don't need to do that. I don't need to do that. And maybe I've been doing that in ways that are really kind of like not creating a beautiful coherence in my relational life or not creating a beautiful coherence in my relationships. And that this as a practice has led this yoga. I like calling it yoga, like you have been, this yoga of being um, clear on which direction I'm responsible for and knowing where my seat is and staying in it and then being able to just enjoy like the movie, the onboard entertainment. um, yeah, that I would love for you to share a bit more, you know, for people that are a little bit newer to somatic tracking and attuning. Even the word attunement, I feel like, is like something that can be so helpful to understand is this way of not only like listening, but the ability, I'll just maybe speak to it from the yin side of, seeing and being felt. Like there's this other experience that sometimes people may not have even been introduced to, which is like feeling felt, you know, being conscious of offering that energy so that I'm aware that another person is empathically feeling me, but I can feel them feeling me. And so there's an awareness of being felt. And these are these really beautiful human threads and nuances that are a little bit more subtle, and you maybe have a lot of experience with this, or it might be newer to you, but it's a really beautiful restorative experience to feel deeply felt without there being a lot of action or conversation involved in it. That nature of two beings even just not speaking to each other, but being co-regulated together in like a morning, like having coffee, not really talking, but you're there and your systems are dancing off of each other and you're communicating through your chemical fields more so than you maybe even realize until somebody starts talking about it. And then it's like, oh yeah, I know that feeling, or oh, I miss that feeling. And so like intimacy, there's so many layers of intimacy that some people are really great at feeling, sensitive people might be really great at feeling. You might find that you're oversensitive and you're wanting some clarity around your sensitivity. This is also a great way of, approaching sort of those layers of deep attunement and being able to negotiate them in mastery and employ them in beautiful ways that lead to more intimacy and transparency. What are sort of elements that you would include as like attuning to or somatic tracking?
Uh, well, as a term, of course, it comes from music. So the ability for a musical instrument to be in tune versus out of tune. And so here we really mean, and all of this, whether it's in the more tantric polarity or whether it's also got some power entrustment, power play involved in it, is attuning to the oscillation and the rhythm of the yin. The sexual experience for most people is 99 point whatever 9% attuned to the rhythm of the yang. And so reorienting, fundamentally changing the orientation to be slowed down, to be whole unto itself, to not have a specific outcome, to not try to reach a specific point, to push an agenda, but to actually have it be circular, non-linear, to actually listen to the signals entirely of the yin. And that is the pace car. It's entirely at the pace of the yin, which is slower. And it's much more like stoking a fire till you get, instead of just, throwing all the paper and some kerosene and, and it's quick, but it's the flash in the pan or whatever, to actually stoke the thing towards these kind of rich, glowing, white hot coals and embers. That's the idea. It's ardor. It's that feeling of like looking into a fire that's just like slow burning and it's got the white coals and you can feel that it's like searing. That's the kind of attunement. That's the kind of vibe. That's the kind of mood. That's the kind of symphony or music that's playing. And it's really retraining for either person, whether they're more predominantly submissive or yin, or whether they're more predominantly dominant or yang, to be reoriented to lean towards that rhythm and oscillation. So, to give maybe a practical example, is this a good time for the dominatrix analogy? Is this a good
Please.
time for that? Yeah, always.
No, it is, and I can go to that like actually go to that dominatrix example right now first. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I think it's a good one to give a concrete. So, I like the example because it shows that this energetic polarity is universal, while there's incredible diversity, and we can flip normal gender scripts as to who's on what in which position. So the example is, think of a man who goes to see a dominatrix, a woman who's going to be in the dominant position, whether or not she's wearing all the getup or not, right? That's not the core of it. So who's what in this encounter? So she, the dominatrix, is the yang, meaning she is in charge of setting the boundaries. She's in charge of her presence filling the room and creating the bubble of protection. She's in charge of flying the plane. She's in charge of the attunement to his yeses. She's the one who's space holding and whose presence is pervading and penetrating the whole process. What's his place or role in this encounter? To be willing to surrender if she sets up the proper parameters and to discern if those are there and ask for them if not. But assuming she's good at what she does, it's then his job to be willing to face his own potential conditioning about being a male and having to be in charge or be tough or whatever it is, and be willing to actually go into a surrendered, submissive space, to entrust forms of his normal sense of tracking and self agency and self responsibility to this woman and trust that she has the capacity, the willingness, and the capacity to safeguard those for him so that he can go into this restorative, reset to factory settings innocence of his being so he can actually melt and submit and not have to be in control. And within that, go inward, not be outward focused, but now be profoundly inwardly focused and practice surrender and practice the truth of his inner sensations and locate what his deep longings are of his yin side. Maybe he wants to adore and worship her as a goddess and put flowers at her feet. Maybe he wants to curl up and have her spoon him and wrap herself around him and hold him, and he needs a cry and he just wants to be held. Maybe he wants to experience intensified sensation. Maybe he wants to be penetrated by her. Any or all of those or other possibilities are all variations of what may occur for someone who wants to go into submission. So all of that is still clearly happening where one is clearly Dom and Yang and one is clearly Yin and Sub, but we've inverted or flipped the usual gender assignations here just to show that it's too adult. Doesn't matter about orientation, doesn't matter about gender identity or biological sex or any of that kind of stuff. It's polarity, and the rules of who's doing what are determined by which side of the which pole they're occupying. And so in this case, done really, really well, he goes into this deep U space. She guides him through it. At the bottom of the U, he gets into kind of a maximal yin state. Anybody who enters submissive space, this is what happens if it's done well. And it's like the most restorative space. And so if you see someone who's gardens or farms and they're really good about regenerating the soil, when the soil comes out, it's like this like really deep, rich black, nitrogen rich, and the worms are there, and versus someone who's doing monocropping or whatever, which is basically in this analogy the equivalent of like only being oriented to yang, and usually a superficial form of it. The soil is being stripped of its nutrient. And then there's all people have to put extra stuff in there to try to make it continue to get growth out of it, as opposed to going into the yin space and letting the soil of our being be fully regenerated. That's the what happens in the subspace is that feeling of the complete innocence and primalness and nakedness. And that's why they get all shiny. That's why they get all glowy and enter into that kind of like ecstatic, formless, blissful, embodied state of being, because that is our nature. And at the core of yin, that's its power, pure regeneration. So that's an example, just to give us an example that shows the dynamic of the polarity, but also shows that there's a radical diversity in who can occupy or express which side.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that we're including that part because I think it's really easy to assume, oh no, Dom equals masculine and Yin equals feminine. And it's like, no, these are the primal forces of the universe. And each of us is a compilation of both. And yet, when we're living primarily in the yang or primarily in the conditioned world, which is the outer manifest world, then it can lead to this experience of not feeling deeply fulfilled and not feeling that the information that's there is like safe to come out in some way. Um, and it was kind of a sweet remembering too of like, oh, right, like that would be an interesting thing for a man to go through that process of like, oh no, what does that make me if if I'm supposed to not act in this way and I'm getting somebody else to play that role for me so that I can experience this role, then what you meet is like there's just so many elements of what you meet. And to have somebody give you permission to meet all of those elements of yourself, it's like it's quite remarkable.
And the cycle or the circuit for the yin or the sub, yeah, thinks that where the yin is in their sexual organs largely, and the yang or the fire is in their heart. And we spend all this time adoring and connecting to the heart, as we talked about in the prior episodes, and then that fire builds up and then overflows for the yin down underneath their water. It goes down to their root and starts warming their yin, their water, and their sexual energies from underneath. So we have fire underwater, as the classic alchemical statement is. And then they go through the whole process of the U, and let's say they come out the other end, deeply integrated after a deep dive. The circuit completes, and the fire water has now been created. The fire and the water have melded into fire water, and then it returns to their heart at the point where they've been guided through the entire process, if it's been done well, as you're speaking of the sweetness. And then they give forth as a moment of thanks, spontaneous gratitude, this kind of pure beam of love from their heart. And remember, for the principally young person or Dom, their water, their openness, their tenderness is in their heart, their receptive space. So there's this pure beam of love coming from the heart of the sub, and it's like a arrow, like a fiery arrow right into the heart in a beautiful way of the Dom. And it's a really breathtaking, and it's one of the purest forms of love one could ever receive.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the complementarity piece. That's really kind of sweet. Is like there's this like remembering that occurs or this restoration that we've been speaking to. Um, so the yang within the yin and the yin within the yang and the necessity of the complementarity to be also an integrated and sovereign experience. Um, I'll get you to kind of expand on this, Chris. I'll maybe just touch on it, just this place of like, the willfulness and the inward focus of the yin experience to stay with the inward focus would be the expression of the yang. Like there's a certain amount of discipline to stay with the inward focus. You have to have a certain amount of um, selfhood to give up yourself. You know, there's a certain amount of understanding your
Hmm.
esteem and self and recognizing your you-ness to be willing to um, put it down or to entrust it to somebody else, knowing that you're not like giving up of yourself. Like the analogy that I like to use for this is sort of this experience of sovereignty where it's like in my earlier iterations, I was like, I don't want to give my heart away because if I give my heart away, then somebody else has got it and, they might hurt me. And that could be really vulnerable of me to give my heart away in that way. And I had this organization around love being this like really vulnerable thing because somebody else was holding onto my heart. And then like that space of sovereignty where it's like, nobody's holding onto I'm the one holding onto my heart. I'm the one where the heart resides within this. And that location to be within self leads to so much more enjoyment, but it actually can be exhausting unless you have that sense of yourself within yourself and who's like the one that's always got the ability to be conscious of that and to be um, radically responsible and acting in accord with your own ownership of that leads to more freedom. You wouldn't think that it would be like that. Um, and then the other side of it being the yang and this like this tenderness and attunement. If I'm only just like structuring myself to be the biggest thing in the room and I'm only orienting to like I'm big, I'm the biggest thing in the room, there's no like there's no listening that happens. Then I'm just projecting energy out into a space and I'm just delivering energy to a space as opposed to like sending and listening and sending and listening. And so that's the yang or the yin within the yang is this like the listening part of the sending. It's like, where am I sending it to? How is it coming back to me? And yeah, I love how you describe this as well. So please expand on some of the points that I've shared.
Yeah, I think particularly in this context, it helps then to be able to look at the various different kinds of submission that people might be into. And again, from an outside without this deep context, like, well, that's weird. Well, that's freaky. Why would say those people? Why would they do freaky or whatever, right? And that just becomes these like weird kinks or fetishes as opposed to what's the logic at play? What's the intent? What's the rationale? And the rationale, as we've been talking about, is from the sub's point of view. If the Dom has enough capacity to do so and willingness, they can entrust parts of themselves that they don't have to track for themselves, which will then allow them to go more deeply within should they choose to do so. And so we can start to look at different kinds of, if you read any of the books, they'll say, well, you can do this kind. You can do like it's a menu and you should just be like ordering off the menu. Like, oh, I'd like to try this one. Well, do you even no, that's not a very deep reflective position on it. But so just a simple example to make it concrete, like let's say someone has their like inner bad boy or girl and they want to be a vixen or they want to be, very sultry or provocative and they want to dress a certain way or access an aspect of themselves, an aspect, not the whole of them, but a whole part of their being. And they would like for a time for that part of them to almost in a theatrical way have the stage. Why would they want to do that? And what are they giving and what are they entrusting for that temporary time to the Dom? They're entrusting their usual sense of self-tracking and their usual sense of identity to be, multidimensional, include all of our parts. And for a time, they're going to hand that over if it feels safe. And then they're just going to want to fully embody one part of themselves and just go all into that aspect. That can be on the far side of the integration, profoundly integrating. They could feel way more whole because they've allowed one aspect of themselves the stage for a bit, had the full experience of that part of themselves, particularly if that part would otherwise socially be criticized, shamed, would be unsafe, would be prejudiced against. And then it has all this like taboo energy because it's been told it's bad, it's naughty, or whatever. And yet now it's got all this like juice in the shadow. And to have that be consciously expressed and integrated rather than it continue to live in the shadow. Um, that's an example of how we can work with this kind of yoga in terms of the intimacy for accessing aspects of ourselves that we might not otherwise access. And maybe that part has specific desires, and that part of us, that part of that person has specific longings and desires. And then agreements and scenes can be constructed, and a process can be constructed for that part of them to have its cake and eat it too, to actually get to experience all that it longs for.
Yeah, the unconscious shadows, when they stay unconscious, they show up as behavior in weird ways. Like I love that expression of like when the energy comes out sideways, as opposed to, truly being given a channel to move through, which can be like remarkably transformative in the way you orient to yourself in the world. But also just like some of the things that I learned about so the nature of the chakras and how our first and second chakras are really related to our physical body as well as our emotional being, and that there's this really masterful thing that happens between the third and the fourth, and that is like for true devotion to occur, like really, authentic, open-hearted loving. There's a need for self-esteem and self-integrity in order to get to that space of devotion. And where we think, I think at times that our heart is being broken or that there's love lost in a dynamic or that there is some sort of like rejection wound, more so what I've seen show up is that it's the nature of the third chakra or the esteem, which is related to shame and humiliation and self relative to other and my kind of relatability, in my unconscious that is sabotaging that capacity for the heart to stay open and be in a dynamic of devotional living. And so it's not that the heart's closing, it's that the energy rushes back down to the place where I feel offended, or I feel like something is, related to my integrity, or, something's going wrong in the world. And it's like this other, person's responsibility or fault. And it's like, that's the space where you get to kind of like, is that true? And if I started to work with humiliation or degradation in a really conscious way, and then I met it instead with love. So where there was something that happened in my earlier life where I did feel like I um, was rejected or hurt, I can then like open up those energies again, work with them in a new way, kind of pull out that shamey energy or pull out that degradation related energy, and then instead re-imprint it with something that is really healthy and pure and connected so that I can feel that energetic connection restore in myself. What's the outcome of that is more open-hearted living. But that the willingness to go into this space of consciously. I love the word scene. I love talking about scenes as like a thing in that happens in BDSM, because I feel like all of life is this play of life, and we sometimes forget that we're these characters in this play of life, and we actually think that the villain's a real villain. Like they're doing these really horrible, bad, and wrong things, and then in our consciousness and our expanded states, we have this remembering of like, oh right, I am so much more than this human experience. And what I have found that BDSM scene work offers is the ability to kind of be like, well, I have this story, and it's this like irritation that I have in my life that is this place that I want to work with. And then you can somatically reorganize the energy around that story. And it might be related to your dad or some trauma thing in your childhood, or it might be related to your um, relationship with authority or money, or these things that you think are happening that are problems, but it can actually just be this like subconscious patterning that's showing up, that when it's addressed in this like nature of a container, it can be transformed so effectively, with people that know what they're doing in this realm, or the willingness to look at it in a new way. And so that's what we're proposing, is like there's other ways of looking at um, the nature of the human experience, and really being a bit more creative with them.
Also, yeah, I think you mentioned there like humiliation, again, in that kind of a play, what is the sub entrusting to the dom? Their normal sense of correct and right way of being in the world that requires them to be like, don't mess with me, don't F with me. Like I'm a so like, which is of course how everybody like needs to be in the world, right? Like don't mess me, don't, I'm not here to be messed with. To have that, but that can be a lot to have to carry. Like I'm an authoritative being, I'm my own, person. And if someone could hold that and we could actually safely go into a space where we don't have to hold that, that can open up for someone who wants to, not that they have to, but if they have that longing,
Yeah.
again, we can see the logic or the deeper intention at play rather than, oh, they must be some just really messed up person because they want somebody to call them bad names or
When it's not addressed, this is kind of what I find, is like when you won't see your stuff, when you won't look at your shadows, they will be shown to you in other people. Like look there, look to your triggers. Um, I built these kind of slides about princess feminine, and we'll talk about mature feminine. Um, because of my own journey of really trying to understand like where am I giving my power away, and where am I in experiences that are organized around younger parts of me, and it's like developmental nature of the princess, and sort of, well, my name Sarah actually means princess, so it's kind of been this theme for my life of like, oh, Princess Sarah. And I say that sort of um with this like smile, because it's like it was this uncomfortable thing where I always have wanted to like be good and be the one who has it all together, or the expression of like a person that is mature in that. And so in that journey of maturation, when I was seeking attention or approval, it was like I was judging myself for that of like, oh, don't be the type of feminine that's seeking attention or approval. And then it just kind of comes out sideways in this, like, starting fights in a dynamic because I'm looking for attention and the familiar fight that I know is like the place that I would go to. And so in this evolution of moving more towards conscious and artfully beholding myself in the natures of masculine or feminine or yang and yin, there's these refinements that have come out that, these shadow behaviors of princess can be like manipulation, passivity, testing, over attachment. I would also say like over giving or giving to the point of like not recognizing when you've moved past your own boundary because you're over oriented to everybody else's idea of you and the necessity of like, well, I have to have this attachment with other, and so I can't handle my own energies in that experience of when we don't have attachment in a way that's familiar. And so evolving that is a really beautiful place of personal empowerment. And then in most women's journey to personal empowerment, it happens for themselves. And then the places that we fall down or the places where we have the most amount of challenge are with the people that are closest to us. And I think this is like this really remarkable thing of like the people in your life that are the closest to you will be the ones that show you where there's still more evolution to happen. Evolution being this kind of like, I have my younger experience and it's not bad or wrong, but in this journey to my more integrated experience, the ability to kind of regress or to know when there's this maybe overly yin relationship to desires. It's like I have to have that thing. Like I have, there's like no impulse control or like there's this reaction that comes up really quickly of like I'm uncomfortable and so I'm just going to eat a cake, or I'm uncomfortable and I'm just going to like go on Amazon and buy a thing. And it's like, yeah, you're meeting your needs because there's a longing from an impulse in that moment that's afraid and it's trying to meet its primary needs. And if it's trying to meet its primary needs in a way that actually isn't sustainable for like greater intimacy and greater, self-growth and transformation, it becomes these like addictive, problematic patterns in our life that are a big part of what I've been working with women. And so this reclamation of seeking attention and approval as like just being this like, oh, this is just like a younger part of me that like I don't want to have sexual urges, I want to be taken, I want it to be somebody else's fault. So like these like fantasies of like somebody taking you and not being the one that's advocating or holding the agency of like, no, I have desires and here's what they are and I would like to have them met in this way. That journey, whether that's like with an intimate partner or actually just like advocating for what it is that you want in your life, which is maybe a new business or a new way of parenting the children, or different ways that we advocate for like, here's my deep desire, and then how do I hold that in a place where I'm in my integrity and I maybe lose attachment in that moment, but I can stay with my inner authority and my own relationship to boundaries and my own relationship to um, desires of that are valuable and they're important to other people, like validating them for myself first, validating that in this experience, what is this inner impulse is innocent and it matters to bring it into the world. And it's my responsibility to do that. But at times we're conditioned away from that pure impulse. So these are some of the ways that those kind of characteristics and core needs show up. And also just the nature of like, we didn't even talk about brats. We haven't even talked about bratting. But this like gives authority away to men or gives authority away in a way that is like it doesn't matter, like apathetically, like you decide and then kind of like, well, but it does matter, to be able to have like a say in life and what your desires are, it does matter. Were you going to add something to that?
Yeah, like whether it's we used the example earlier of dominance, but here like objectification is another one.
Totally.
So there's unconscious and destructive objectification, particularly of women, all over the place. It's really yucky. It's disgusting. So as a consequence of that, then the gate swings the other way into being anti-objectification, understandably, because that form of objectification is yuck. It's quite icky and
Yeah.
wrong. But then the subjectification process is like, well, all this kind of energy here we're talking about, culturally it tends to show up with women. It's like you got to be your own agent and you got to be, like the domestic goddess and you have to be, wild in the bed, but also you have to be a woman in the streets and you got to be this and you got to be that. It's like, wow, there's a lot of money and a lot of people's attention on the inner world and the inner subjectivity of women and telling them, are they feeling right? Are they feeling wrong? Or they should be feeling this, but they're not feeling that. And it's really awful. It's really oppressive. And so this is my thing. It's like, well, where's the third option here?
Yeah.
And that is, interestingly, tantrically, if it's safe objectification and consciously, consensually desired, then it transforms into being an object of adoration.
Right.
And that's a whole other experience that's not available. Either we have the gross objectification of in this case, female body, um, and then the anti-objectification, be your own person and subjectivizing. But what if then there might be this taboo third option, which is maybe inside of a tantric kinky objectification done properly actually has found a different form of subjective power by being adored.
Yeah.
And we can do that for all these different classic forms of submission. You can really go through like what's the official wrong version that we see publicly? What's the anti that advocates more compassionately for not some oppressive thing? And then what's the taboo third possible where the venom becomes antidote? Like, where is that hidden inside of it?
Hmm. Yeah.
So for brats, the idea that they get to be bratty, that they get to, you know, bust somebody's chops for a bit, that they get to be, that they get to be provocative, they get to be sassy, they get to, have a green light to start to have a go at someone playfully. But then to really understand that underneath that, as you were saying, is the desire to be actually like what they really want is somebody who's tough enough to take it, and then they want to submit, they want to surrender inside of that person's space. And that's what they're really longing for. So there can be more combative forms of submission, the way they really want to like play and they want to poke and they want to make sure somebody's strong enough, and then they want like some clear energy come back, say like, yeah, actually, I've got you. And then they then they go into melt, and others don't necessarily into the combat side at the beginning. They want way more sweetness and tenderness from the beginning, and that's what melts them. And a big part of learning for an empowered form of submission for any kind of sub is like what kinds of things actually entice them to submit and what things don't. And it's all, if as long as it's like right for them and consensual, then that's the right answer for them. They don't have to compare themselves. Oh, am I the good sub? Oh, am I doing again? That's all externalizing. That would be like princess kind of in an unhelpful way. But
Yeah.
just getting clear, like, what actually entices them to feel safe? And then what kind of surrender do they want to give?
Yeah, and this space of like somebody else has to make me feel this way. Like it's like your job to make me feel this way. And if you're not doing it, then it's like, like that there's a real immaturity to it is kind of, my son has these moments where he's like, Mommy, you made me feel this way. And I was like, oh no, we are gonna be talking about the maturation process and all of its nature. Um, but yeah, let's like talk about like, well, what is a sovereign expression of mature feminine? And in its unbalanced kind of expression. Like this can be like, I got it. I don't need anybody's help. I got everything. I will be my masculine. I will be my feminine. I don't need anybody to support me in anything. And that would be a shadow tendency of like, yeah, you got yourself, but like this hyper independent nature of yin, of feminine, of maybe that what I would say is sort of like the outcome of like neo feminism, which is sort of like you were alluding to, is that space of like, oh, because I can, I should, because I can vote and wear pants and like have a job and raise my family and like do all of it, as well as like, have 5% body fat and no wrinkles, and, just like live in this like perfected world in some way that is just this like realistic way of living life. It really just leads to you living a very surface life that is exhaustive. And that there's this other experience when you really start to deeply understand that you don't need to be everything to be actually everything. You already are everything. You don't need to work to be everything. When you really come to being yin, you realize that you are the universe and that you don't need to go and prove that to anybody in order to experience yourself this way. And that in much of my healing journey, out of being a really independent woman who is able to play in both realms. I can play in the masculine realm really comfortably, and I enjoy it, and it's fun, and I'm good at it. And also this experience of being yin in my biology and the way that my essence organizes, and how when I was able to come into my own center of my center, that space was this like overflowing experience of self. Like that this feminine journey is like both deeply desirous and ever changing and extremely full, but also like I don't need to be anywhere else. I can be here. I don't need to go into the world and prove to the world that they should do it my way or they should follow the way that I'm saying. Like it really is this like sensual experience of being so grounded in my nervous system where I both understand self and boundaries to with a profound level of clarity, but I'm incredibly soft. It's like I don't need to be like, there's my boundary, there's my boundary, there's my boundary, there's my boundary. My boundary is communicated by my being, and there's a signal that's incredibly easy to attune to, right? Like we were saying that word attunement is yeah, it's beautiful. So this also leads to this emotional resilience and
I just
authenticity.
pause you for a sec,
Yeah.
which is I just wanted to really praise that. And for any yins or subs watching, that little riff there, you were really communicating, not just talking from the slide, but you were, to me, really communicating the nature of that kind of the sovereign gifting that comes from submission. I could really feel the like power of your being, that yin gifting and presence really came through right there. So just for anybody who is watching or and is listening, who's drawn in this way, like really pay attention to that little part there so you can really get the transmission of it.
Thanks, Chris.
Because it's one thing to get all the study, and the study is actually really important in this one. The There's a reason there's the classic stereotype of the like dominatrix librarian who's got all the books because it's actually like a thing. Like,
Mm.
that's why that kind of classic image is there. It's like there's actually quite a bit of, in the best sense, conceptual learning to do this, and that's why we've been talking through. And obviously, the conceptual learning is integral and key, but is not by itself the the transformational learning. And that's to take it another level and actually into experience and embodiment. And it's a different thing for any kind of transformational arc. It's particularly true in this topic. There's a difference between somebody who's read the books and somebody who can actually transmit the teaching. And the course is here in part for those who want to explore this side of things or polarity as such, to be on that journey and to have a lot of safety and room to like, whoops, I tried this, or I don't know about this yet, or I got this question, or there's this longing. I'm not quite sure how to, and to really have safety to say it's okay to learn and to grow. And small steps turn out to be huge steps in this area. People are so starved for this level of deep polarity and intimacy that even just little, seemingly little things turn out to be immensely meaningful and powerful.
Mhm. Yeah, truly. Um, I don't think I could underscore that enough of like it is not going to be a big outer change that leads to the yield of the thing that you think that you're looking for, you know. It's like the allegory of like buying eggs at the hardware store. It's like they don't sell them there. That's not where you get eggs. And I really feel like that's a really great reminder of like we can, I see this for the feminine nature to kind of keep going back to the hardware store and being like, why don't you have eggs here? Like,
Right.
so this nature that is already here, that is within us, that is already our experience, um, and how that can be, you know, a few little shifts in your life that become embodiment experiences as opposed to kind of the, you know, performative experiences. Um, yeah, quite magical, you know, and alchemy in this way is quite, is a really beautiful parallel to magic where it's kind of, you know, this, like, how did that happen? It seems like a miracle. And it's like, well,
And then it naturally leads to people wanting more of it. And the beauty in this one is you don't have to
yeah.
sell it. Like it sells itself in terms of, wow, that was amazing. More of that, please. And then to know that there's just layer after layer, unending layers of how far I can go.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the invitation for people that want to explore this is to join us on a journey for 12 weeks where you get to work with us. Little play shops. I like the word play shop more than workshop now because I just feel like who wants to work?
Right.
These are play shops. These are like opportunities to be able to learn in a playful way and also to be able to consider that all of your, you know, triggers or challenges or perceived problems are portals to greater opportunity for intimacy and connection. And you could circle around and fight over stuff and be unconscious and exist in a dynamic that is really, really painful and be so close to a dynamic that is really regenerative and fulfilling with just a couple perceptual shifts and a couple, you know, energetic practices and so that's what we're offering is that people could come on this journey, whether you're in a couple and you want to work in a romantic couple way, or if you want to, as I am, go on this journey as a single that is integrating and restoring and practicing living and leading a life of consciously navigating these primal forces of yang and yin. So
It's gonna be fun.
it's gonna be fun.
It's
It's
gonna
gonna
be
be
fun.
cheeky, it's gonna be playful. And if you think that we went into like a lot of like, you know, cheeky stuff, it's like, well, I mean, we kind of did, but there's certain things that you have to sign up
You
for.
should have seen some of the slides that Sarah original. I was like, oh, those might show up in class.
Yes, like Sarah will get to have a little bit more carte blanche on her creative expression. Yeah, so thanks so much for this
Oh,
like
thank you.
mini masterclass journey, Chris. It's been so delightful. And yeah, the invitation. Hopefully, that's something that other people want to join us on also.
It'd be wonderful.
Hmm.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Hmm.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.